if you bought software in the 1980s, be it application or games, there was one name you couldn't get by, and that was Broderbund, or Broderbund, or Broderbund, depending on how you saw it in a magazine and decided that that O should be pronounced. But our guest today is probably going to be able to clarify that age-old question for us. He is one of the founders of the company and basically helped create one of the foundational stones of computer software of that era. Welcome to the show, Gary Carlston.
Thank you.
You're
nice
welcome.
to be here.
Yeah. So I guess first off, how do we pronounce the name of the company?
Well, however you'd like. I mean, the slash to the O is like an umlaut. It would be Broderbund, but as long as somebody says the name, it's fine. You know.
Perfect. Okay, then I'm going to try to treat it like an umlaut with a Broderbund. Gary, give me, let's start from the beginning. Before we get to a company, before we get into software, what is your background education-wise?
I have a Bachelor of Arts in Scandinavian Languages and Literature from Harvard.
Oh, my goodness. And, okay. What drove you into that area?
Trying to find a department small enough where I could get the professor's time. And also I was interested in maybe leaving the United States for a while. This was during the Vietnam War. I didn't have to leave. I just found it all very unpleasant. To be in a country so riven. And so learning Swedish and moving to Sweden was part of my objective.
Cool.
And I did that. So.
Obviously, I mean, first time I heard the story, it was one of those teenage dreams. So I do have to ask about being a female athlete trainer in Sweden at the time.
I'm coach of the Swedish women's national championship basketball team. Well, I was just walking down the street, basically in Sweden, and I was walking with a black friend, and he saw an American guy, and he saw another black guy, and said, "Hey, where can we play some basketball?" So the other fellow told us, and we went to play basketball that Saturday, and I got to chatting with the coach there, and he asked what I was doing in Sweden, and I said, "Well, I don't know. I'm just here. I don't have any money, and I don't know how long I can stay." And he said, "Well, if I can pay you under the table if you want to help coach some of our teams." It was a YMCA in Stockholm that had teams ranging in age from 8-year-old kids to adult men and women. And I said, "Sure, fine." And then he got banned from basketball for a year for getting in a fight, and during a basketball game, he ran out on the court as a coach and got in a fight. So all of a sudden, I inherited this team, and they were 5'10" to 6'3", and 9 fashion models and a bulldog, and we got invited all over. We got invited all over the world representing Sweden, and it was kind of fun. I didn't know a whole lot. I'd played basketball, and I was kind of a 12th man in small college kind of ability. But anyway, that's how I fell into it, and I went back and forth, and I did it for a total of 4 years.
Wow.
So that's how that happened.
That's pretty cool.
I came back from Sweden, and I dated a couple of 6-foot blondes, and then I married a short brunette. He's sitting about 10 feet away from me right now. So.
And okay, so you stopped doing it after about 4 years. Was it just because you were like, okay, I got to try to do something serious, or what was the motivation for returning?
It was that was kind of it. Because I was, for the first 2.5 years, I was being paid under the table. When I went after 4 years to try to expand my work, I eventually got a work permit, but I didn't get credit for the time that I was working illegally. So my job was restricted to basketball coach, whereas I wanted to get into teaching and, some other kind of job. And I thought about that, and then I was kind of frustrated by that. And then for 2 summers in a row, they just canceled summer. It just stayed winter. And I thought, oh, well, I need to go somewhere with more sunshine. So I moved to Seattle, of course.
Oh, brilliant solution. Yes. I mean, as a native Seattleite, I can vouch for the fact that was a bad idea.
Well, it seemed like a tropical paradise compared to Sweden. And actually, I was in Seattle for just for about 7 months, and it was during a drought, so it was really quite nice. Then I got a job in Oregon, so I moved down there.
Gotcha. And what were you doing down in Oregon?
I was running the March of Dimes. So I was traveling, driving 1,000 miles a week, just different counties, working with the public health departments and working on birth defects and stuff like that. If you're going to have a traveling job, Oregon's a great place for it. Gorgeous place.
That's true. Yeah. And so at this point, is it more of a managerial thing that you're doing? Are you actually doing fundraising? What is the daily activity?
Well, it's setting up fundraising activities and disbursement activities for the various counties in Oregon. So in one sense, it's managerial, but on the other hand, it's just footwork, just running from county to county and trying to find volunteers and things like that. I burned out pretty quickly on that. It was a lot of traveling, a lot of hard work, and.
I can imagine it. So, where do you go from there? What's the next step?
Well, my brother Doug was working as a lawyer out in Maine, rural Maine, and he was getting pretty frustrated out there, and he wanted to move out west. And so he packed his dog into a car and drove out to Oregon to be with me. And I had not had a great deal of success finding another job after I left the March of Dimes. So we were sharing an apartment, and he had bought a Radio Shack TRS-80 computer, played with that, and he'd written a couple of games. And he said to me, well, you can't pay your share of the rent. What are you going to do? I said, I don't know. And he said, well, why don't you try, selling my games? And I've hopped over a couple of years there in which I tried to start up a couple of businesses, either with my brother or with a friend, and they'd failed. And so I was theoretically in debt for $9,000 in terms of paying back these 2 partners who had funded these things. So I said, well, I don't want to do another business, and he said, well, you can't pay your rent. What are you going to do? So he went out to buy something, and I got on the phone and sold $300 worth of his games over the phone. And I thought, well, this is easy. So that was, I don't know, I'm guessing maybe in February or something of 1980. And over the next 6 or 8 months, I probably only sold another $600 worth. I mean, it wasn't, it wasn't working. And I won't tell the whole story. I'll just go however sequence you want to know the information.
Well, that's actually a good start. So those were the Galactic Empire titles that he was doing back then, I believe.
The Galactic Saga, yeah.
Yeah, Galactic Saga. And so if was your sale activity just limited to trying to call, or were you doing any traveling for it, or what does selling software in 1980 look like, I guess?
Well, I'm trying to remember here. I think we had, at that time, we had his 3 games, and my other brother, who was a professor at the time, I think at the University of Iowa, had written an Apple game called Tank Command. And selling at that time consisted of driving down commercial strips looking for computer stores, because they were popping up so fast you couldn't use the yellow pages, which I know no one uses yellow pages now, but for years that was the standard. So I simply headed down to California, and I drove, through all the populated towns, north, south, whatever, just selling these things door to door. And as I say, I had some success, but not enough for anybody to live on. Up until a breakthrough, which we'll get to whenever you want to.
Okay. Well, and so at this point, are we still in the plastic baggy and photocopied instruction booklet phase, or was there already ever an attempt at packaging?
Well, I'm trying to remember when the transition happened. No, there was definitely plastic baggy. Because I remember even when we got a hold of some really dynamite products from Japan that December, it was still just in a printed sheet in a plastic bag. So I don't think we had not gotten into packaging.
Okay. And was there any contact with existing publishers at the time? I know there was at least one version of one of the Galactic Saga games that came out through Adventure International.
Yeah, Scott Adams and so on.
Yeah.
Scott didn't have an exclusive on the game because it was my brother's game, and it was interesting when we decided to start publishing ourselves. Scott did say, "Well, you guys are a little too late to get into this business." We're friends now on Facebook. I haven't ever communicated with him to say, "Well, who knows?" But,
one of the things I ran across recently was a review of the first 3 games of that Saga series in Soft Talk magazine, the December 1980 issue, where they reviewed the 3.
Yeah.
And was that something that you guys initiated by sending out copies to a magazine like Soft Talk, or was it something that they would have just picked up a copy at a store and reviewed?
Well, I honestly don't remember. We did initiate things like that. Sometimes I remember when we get into the whole connection with Japan was initiated by writing to magazines. But in terms of the Soft Talk review, I just really don't remember.
Yeah.
We, at some point, obviously, we would send those things out. We became kind of the champions of free samples. And I forget what we called it, but we sent out, whenever we had a completed product, hundreds, if not thousands, of free copies to stores and reviewers and stuff like that.
Okay. Well, and so I guess then let's move forward. So 1980 is the year where you're still running stuff around. And what changes that? What is the big breakthrough that goes from you just going from store to store trying to sell this stuff? What changes Broderbund?
Well, the big thing was the Japanese breakthrough. And that happened, excuse me, because we had been at the West Coast Computer Fair, and there was a Japanese company next to us that were running Apple games that were arcade quality. although they had this bizarre characteristic that they all played sideways on your monitor, and you had to turn your monitor sideways to play it. Well, they didn't speak any English at all, and they didn't seem to, so they didn't really communicate with anybody. But we saw the quality and said, "Boy, we have not seen anything like that." So we wrote to the various Japanese computer magazines in English, saying, if you would like to have your games sold in the United States, please contact us. And we were hoping that somehow this would work. And my brother was out east trying to sell his products out east. And I suddenly get a call on the phone in very heavily accented English, saying, hello, this is Mr. Nakazawa. I saw your letter in the various magazines, and I'd like to talk to you about distribution. I'm here at the Eugene airport, and I can be at your office in 15 minutes. Well, now our office consisted of our apartment, with one Apple and one TRS-80. And I'm thinking, oh boy, how am I going to convince him that we're real, Mm-hmm. And this is the strangest part of the story. I had been at the dentist that day, and while waiting, I was just reading a magazine, and it was an article about doing business in the Middle East. Now, Middle East, not Near East, Far East. I know the difference. Mm-hmm. But I got nothing to go on, because here this guy's going to be there in 15 minutes. And the article said that Middle Easterners like to do business with people of their own social class. But when dealing with Americans, they figure anyone can make money in America. So they like to do business with people based on education, a higher education. All right, so I'm rushing to clean around up the apartment, and there's a copy of Harvard Magazine. And so I put it on the coffee table, So, doorbell rings. It's nighttime. It's not work hours or anything. And in walks Mr. Nakazawa, and we bow and exchange business cards. And his eyes goes to the coffee table, and he says, Harvard. And for 3 days, we talked about world events and history and literature and, everything under the sun. And at the end of that, he says, and he showed me the games, which were the ones we'd seen. The ones that we had seen, only now they didn't play sideways. They were fixed. And he basically said, look, I knew you weren't a real company. I was just going to use you as a shill and then go down to this company in Los Angeles. But I really enjoyed just being with you. So I'll give you the rights to these games, but you have to make as many copies as you want while I'm here. So,
okay.
So I don't remember exactly how this worked. Whether my brother came home and we got to work lickety split, or he came back, because he would not give us the masters to make these games. But we made whatever number we made, and as I say, up to this point, we'd sold in the hundreds of dollars. And December 1980, we sold $100,000 worth of games.
Oh, Jesus.
Because these Japanese games were just technically beyond what anybody in the U.S. could do on the Apple. And the funny thing I found out later when I got to know Mr. Nakazawa is that my little trick of putting the magazine there, even though he's not from the Middle East, he was probably the only person in Japan who would have worked on.
Why is that?
Well, he came from an old merchant family, and as I understand Japanese culture, merchant social class is middle, not not upper class. But as we discovered, his only friend, because he was socially very awkward, his only friend growing up was Emperor Hirohito's second son.
Wow.
So we go to Japan, we're staying at the family compound, which survived the firebombing of Tokyo. It's 270 years old and just modest, but very Japanese and beautiful. And he pulls out a photo album of him growing up. And there he is in his Little League uniform with his arms around this other boy, and standing behind them proudly is Emperor Hirohito with his arms around the two of them. And this was before the war, you know. And so in his mind, he's totally upper class. But in Japan, he's just a goofball. It's like, no, you're just a merchant. So this social class thing, putting out the Harvard magazine, it wouldn't have made sense to anyone else. But for him, it was, here's people of the right class for me to deal with in the United States. And so the Japanese programmers produced, it had two effects, besides that we got some great games to sell. It also attracted some really top-notch American programmers who said, we want to know how to do that. We'll come work with you. We'll all go to Japan. We'll learn those techniques. And so that was the big breakthrough. That's why the few times I've been asked to speak, more so in the 90s and now, about business, and I talk about luck. I said, well, you need luck, but you got to cast your nets for luck. So that led to the Japanese magazines was, let's cast our nets and see what happens. And we just got incredibly lucky.
That is amazing. I mean, especially that it was the same people that contacted you back.
It was the same games. It wasn't the same people. And I never did figure that out. Eventually, the Japanese sources dried up because it turned out that Mr. Nakazawa was not paying the Japanese programmers fairly, and it could be that they had tried having different representatives. They contacted those first people who came to the United States. Had great products, but they spoke no English at all, so there was no interaction. Whereas Mr. Nakazawa's English was easy to make fun of, but it was functional. We were able to make deals, and so maybe they had tried different representatives or.
Okay, gotcha. So there was something going on there, and the products that you picked up from him, and this is StarCraft, right? It was the name of the company.
Right.
Okay, and so these products that are coming out, you guys just have the distribution rights to them. What is, I guess, what do and this, I'm a lawyer by trade, just as a warning. What do the publishing rights look like at this point? Is it just sort of a handshake deal that, you've got this number of units, and once you've sold those, that's it? Like you just said, you could only make so many copies. How did that relationship keep going after that initial meeting, and what were your rights to on these games?
Well, they were totally handshake. They were based on make as many copies as you can while I'm here from these masters, pay me for them, and then you can go sell them. But the other twist on these initially is that these were knockoffs of coin-operated video games. And, when we first started doing it, people said, well, isn't that quaint what they can do on a computer? Because no one thought you could do that on a computer. And then as the market began to grow, we got a call from a friend at Atari who was in management saying, look, rather than have our lawyers contact you, don't you think that, those are our copyrights? And don't you think you should stop selling them? And we said, well, that's fair enough. I mean, no one thought it would get as big as fast as it did, you know. And we said, because someday you'll want our copyrights. I mean, you want to use our products. And so it was just that was done on a handshake too. We stopped producing those. But by that time, the Japanese folks were making original products that were great sellers. And then the American programmers who had learned the techniques were making really good products too. So.
And I'm curious, because you said that you got American talent who wanted to learn these skills. How did that work? Was it basically them trying to reverse engineer the code inside of Broderbund, or did you guys actually go to Japan and meet with the designers and stuff there?
We went to Japan.
Okay.
So they came along with us, and they weren't employees, these American programmers. They were just people who kind of, we'll give you our products if you introduce us these folks to teach us how to do this. So that's kind of how that worked.
Okay, interesting. I guess this brings us into 1981 at this point. There's some new systems on the horizon. The Apple II's been out since 77. Is that a factor early on for Broderbund, or are you guys primarily sticking to the TRS-80 and the Apple II?
You'd be more familiar at this point with the sequence in terms of when things came out. I mean, there was the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64, but I'm lost on the years of those things. Basically, our model at that point was still very much like a book publisher. It was all outside submissions, and so people would come to us, and there was a natural clustering of people. If we put out Apple games, and people who made Apple games would come to us. Had we put out Atari games, there were companies like Synapse, for example, that were more Atari-oriented. I presume that people who wrote something in Atari would go to them first. Eventually, people tried to cover most of the major bases, but initially, you kind of got pigeonholed. The TRS-80 disappeared pretty quickly, and so we were kind of, there were three of us, the three, Sierra Online, Sirius, and Broderbund were kind of your three publishers for outside games. Lots of other Apple folks that, produced were the owner-operator, I guess you'd call it, that program, whatever that term should be, the Robert Clardy and people like that. I forget the name of the company, but, they would, or Lord British, was that his name?
Richard Garriott's later Origin Systems, yeah.
Right.
And so so you guys are doing mainly submissions, and are you guys paying a royalty rate? Are you paying a flat fee for the rights to the games in this early period? What's the model?
Royalties. Yeah.
So it's basically they're creating the games on their own. They bring them to you, and then they're just getting a percentage of whatever the sale is.
Right. Okay. And we initially what we provided was editorial feedback and sales and marketing. Although I use advisedly marketing, we were a product driven company. So that's where the free samples came in,
What you said that you'd make a ton of copies, free samples for magazines and stores. What was the reaction from the retailers and from the publications to that?
Well, they loved it. We got I presume some of those stores were just fake fronts to get free software. But what I'm trying to remember what we called that program. Sneak preview.
Mm-hmm.
That was so the stores then could, without putting out any money, could right away put that game up in the window. And we had quite a hot streak there through the early mid '80s, where in terms of like the soft talk bestseller list, number one hit after another, and put it up in the window, and it was mutually advantageous.
Gotcha. And I mean, how are you contacting at this point the retailers? Are the retailers contacting you? Is there some industry-wide way of distributing the information about who the retailers are?
Well, I don't remember that. I do know that there were distributors at this point, and they helped a lot in terms of just I didn't have to spend quite much time, packing boxes with software. I'm trying to remember how we got those lists. I just can't remember. I mean, they probably contacted us, or we'd read about them in magazines or try to find chains of them. I really just it might not have been much more advanced than driving down the street looking for stores.
I'll believe it. I'll believe it. And the production, at what point do you move away from baggies and we start getting a bit more professionalization of the packaging and materials? How does that process work?
Well, we probably got more professional once my sister joined the company, which would have been, I think, January '81, somewhere in there. She was burned out running Christmas stores for Lord & Taylor in Manhattan. And so she came out and kind of got into marketing and added some gloss and some flash where my brother and I don't qualify on those fronts. But I don't remember. I'm trying to remember what our first box would have been. It was probably in 1981 sometime. I just can't remember what those packages looked like. I mean, there were companies like Strategic Simulations that did the $50 games and stuff. We thought, wow, look at that fancy boxes and all that kind of stuff. But I don't remember exactly when we made the. I know we'd done it by 1982, but I don't know exactly where in there. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. And so when you do make that jump, I mean, what is the obviously from a financial standpoint, now there's a much greater financial outlay to the production of the product. Is this a moment where you're still being able to do these expansions and upgrades to your to the product through with the money that's coming in, or is there already some need to get some additional financing for these kind of leaps?
Well, the irony is we didn't need the financing, but we didn't have a lot of financial sophistication. So we went out and took venture capital, and we hired our first CFO shortly thereafter. And he said, if you hired me before, I would have told you didn't need the money. Which would have been nice to know.
Okay, and that already is a bit of an ominous statement. So what was it like at this point to get venture capital? Did they approach you? You approached them? What does that process look like in 1981 or 82?
I think the venture capital people were doing the approaching. And we were easy to find. My brother and I played broom hockey with this group from Stanford Business School, and they were all venture capitalists, and so they'd come up and talk to us. And, so we interviewed with various people, and I don't remember the exact sequence, but somewhere in there I shattered my leg, and I was gone for 3 months from the company.
Ooh.
And I don't remember if that was right after, right before. Anyway.
So the venture capitalists come in, and what did you see, or what was the perceived value of the venture capitalists? Was it just the capital, or was there some other kind of know-how or connections or something else that was coming out of it?
I think it was connections to professional management was the hope that, neither of us really felt competent to carry the company beyond, a couple hundred people or whatever it was at that point.
Okay. And when you say a couple hundred people, I mean, if most of the product at this point is still coming from the outside, so what are these employees doing inside Broderbund?
Well, let me see. Might not have been a couple hundred people at that point, because I think when I left the company, there were 270 people. So when going back to the venture capital days, it would have been more like 30 or 40 now that I think about it. The product management was a big part of it. The people that would work with the programmers to, tell them we'd like to see this, we'd like to see that. I can get you this, I can get, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And then of course the production. We made products simply by having a bunch of Apple computers and. The master's in the machine, and you stick in the slaves, and you make a bunch of copies at once. And it wasn't fancy.
Yeah, it was. You didn't have a big production facility that was mass producing on specialized equipment, the inventory.
Right. I mean, I remember, and this would have been 81 or 82, just the big. Oh, we're a real company, and now we bought a shrink wrap machine. So that would have been the point at which we moved out of baggies.
Okay.
When we got that shrink wrap machine.
Wow. You're hoping to get this more professional approach. Are you also, you already talked a little bit about what SSI was doing. How much attention are you spending on what the competition is doing at this point?
Well, the competition, quite a bit. We were friendly. It was, I mentioned the three, Sirius Software and Sierra Online. So we would go on rafting trips together, and we'd call each other and say, where are you getting your baggies or your discs or whatever, that sort of thing. Probably that was antitrust, who knows. But it was all pretty friendly. I remember the conversation where we all called each other and said, let's come up with a standard for how you pause a game. So it's the same on every, and that was the escape key. That was just a bunch of phone calls. Let's make it the same for all of us, that sort of thing.
That's awesome. That is pretty cool. And so did that stay? Did that friendliness persist even after the professionalization of the management? Or
it started to decay basically when Electronic Arts came on the scene and tried to poach everybody's programmers. I mean, we would never have done that to each other. We knew each other's programmers. We all went rafting together. I don't remember how long Sirius stayed in business. Because they had basically one programmer, Nasser Jabeli, and he left the business to go do cosmetics or some, where you could see what you would look like.
Oh.
that sort of thing. But he used to write, they called them 40-hour wonders. His games for serious, it took him about 40 hours to write a new one.
Wow.
And I don't know enough about how Sierra Online's structure was in terms of whether they took outside management at any point.
I've actually just interviewed Ken Williams about a month and a half ago, and he basically stayed in charge of the company all the way up until the point where they had to merge with another company. And even though he did bring in some people, he largely used the board of directors as sort of his management consulting. That was a big deal for him. That was his reason, similar to what you were saying with bringing in some professional help. That was his reason for bringing in the venture capitalist. And he also had, strong feelings about the long-term effects of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it puts you in a position, it's you got to pay the mob back. You got to go public. And,
sorry, that's just a brilliant way of phrasing it. I never thought about it that way. That's great.
And the other thing, I mean, just to get that off my chest, is the way they write the deals. If you start the company, they want you to keep running the company. But we were a product-driven company, and I was running product development. I didn't want to manage people. I wanted to develop. Mm-hmm. So when I said, well, I don't want to be, VP of this or that. Well, then I had to forfeit 90% of my stock because that was.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, well, okay, we really didn't need that money, and now I'm a minor shareholder. And so I left the company for a while, and then I came back. They gave me 10% of it back if I would come back because I hadn't come up with any new products.
Well, and I guess we need to take a step back there for just a second, because obviously the company starts with your brother Doug creating a handful of products. You have another brother who also developed a product. I guess the first question is, why does and I'm sorry if you did mention his name, but the brother who creates Tank Command, why did he produce any other titles for the company, or was that his sole contribution?
Well, he produced a board game about 7 or 8 years later called Personal Preference that he did pretty well with internationally. It wasn't a big hit in the United States, and actually he's working on a new version of it now. But he's a professor of social psychology at Iowa and then Purdue, so he wasn't in the business of, it stayed a hobby with him. And the only reason he produced Tank Command is that it worked into some stuff he was working on in social psychology.
Oh, interesting. That's okay. That's fascinating. And so Doug is making games, and he continues to make, or at least supervise, games as the company is moving forward. Correct?
Well, no. The basically he does that until I break my leg, and then when I come back, he says, "Let's hire somebody to do sales. You, Gary, take over product development," which at the time there wasn't any internal. We didn't have any people working for us, technical people, and then Doug would run, the company. So Doug didn't do any more development at that point, other than we would have these strategy sessions and say, well, what kind of products should we look for, and should we develop some internally? We didn't develop very many products internally, but we did do a lot of conversions. So when I came back from a broken leg, I hired programmers kind of the same way I'd sold software. I drove up and down to computer stores and found programmers working in computer stores, and if they looked good, I'd hire them and bring them, down to Marin. And so I forget what question I'm answering, but that's how we got started. Then trying to put various games on as many platforms as we could. We felt we could do sales on, so that's where we added Atari and stuff like that.
Now, those ports, you obviously have, since the games are coming in from the outside, I'm guessing that the original programmers did them on a single platform. Do you have your own internal porting teams at this point? Are the original developers trying to do the ports? How does that get organized?
So the ports are usually turned over to a single person. I mean, I'm not a technical person, so we didn't have systems or anything. All that stuff was developed later. It was basically you've got something that's written on the Apple, and I'd ask the programmer, do you want an IBM version? And they say, sure. So I'd find a programmer and said, why don't you do the IBM version, and you get a little chunk of the royalty to do that. So it was pretty easy to get people to do conversions because, they had the product right in front of them in terms of what they were supposed to make, and then they'd get a piece of the action. And the original programmer was getting a multiplying effect so it worked out pretty well.
Okay, cool. And so it was purely a royalty issue. These guys weren't in-house staff at this point.
Oh no, we had some in-house staff. Their compensation was blended of salary and royalties, and that only worked for a while. And after a while, then people who did other aspects related to the product, to the success of the product, whether it was, animation or any aspect of it. So, well, why does the programmer get a royalty and I don't get a royalty? We're both employees, and so eventually anyone who was employee, the royalty was phased out in about 84, 85, somewhere in there.
Gotcha. Now, that time frame brings us up to the point where you get the video game crash in 83. Now, was there any attempt by Broderbund up until that point to maybe get into the cartridge console business prior to the 83 crash?
Yeah, we had a very unsuccessful conversion attempt to get onto the Texas Instruments. I guess was that a video game or was that a computer? No, I can't remember.
The Texas Instruments, the 99.4 was a computer, but it used primarily cartridges as the software medium.
Okay, well that we hired a team in Texas to do that, and they failed on all fronts, so that was lost money. Mostly we just sold the rights there. Like, I'm trying to remember. We thought of them as distinct still. So I don't recall that we did any direct to video game stuff. I could be 100% wrong.
I'm looking through Moby Games right now, and I don't see any releases for the consoles. I'm seeing stuff like, obviously, VIC-20 and Atari 8-bit. The VIC-20 software, I'm not sure if that was being released on cartridge or if it was disc-based.
I think we did some cartridges, but I don't remember. It's getting to be a while ago.
And that's perfectly understandable. Oh, no, VIC-20 cartridge. Sorry, I'm just seeing this here for some of the titles, like Apple Panic. Yeah. Although that had a creative software copyright on it as opposed to the Broderbund markings. Right. That may have been a sub-license.
Yeah, it might have been.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm always just curious to see how the computer companies perceived the console crash and whether or not if it influenced your decision-making process as far as what kind of software to push forward with, especially since you had such success with action-y arcade-like games in the early years, and there was a refocus on more computer-oriented software as opposed to the action-y stuff.
Yeah, I think I think what happened there is, the venture capitalists were located in the East or overseas. So their awareness of our company was primarily what they saw on the marketing front. And so we were mostly product driven. We didn't do that much advertising and flashy marketing. And so they were always kind of saying, well, what's your handle? What's your niche? You should get in there and dominate whatever that is. And so we had this, outside of the video game area, we had this product called Bank Street Writer, which is a word processor, easy to use. And then one of the two or three internally developed products that we had, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, suddenly took off. And so they said, you're an educational software company. That's a handle, So that was kind of, all right, let's go this direction. Because that distinguishes us. And then because we came from the video game business, we had access to more technically proficient programmers than most of the educational companies did. Their stuff tended to be clunky, low res, and we had all these flashy video game guys that would say, what do you want me to do, sort of thing.
Gotcha. And but before that, you guys still had some very, very big successes with games like Choplifter and Loadrunner.
Aren't those around 82, 83, somewhere in there?
Those are 83. So we're still, I guess, a couple years before Carmen Sandiego is going to hit.
Right.
Obviously, print shop is also something we need to talk about. I guess the question is, when those games come out, how big are they from a sales standpoint, and what effect does that have on the company if there suddenly is a big hit? What does it do for you guys marketing wise and and decision making wise?
We were never in total agreement decision making wise about what we should do about anything.
Oh, okay.
The interesting thing about Loadrunner is it simply took over Japan. In 1984, Broderbund's sales in Japan exceeded those of IBM.
Wow.
And, they played the National Loadrunner Championships on this huge, 150-foot screen at the World's Fair in Japan.
Oh, Jesus.
We went over there with the programmer, and he was a rock star, a total rock star. So it was a very exciting time. It's hard to get an infinite supply of. In both those cases, or especially in the case of Choplifter, the moment I saw it, this is number one. It's going to be number one. It was. But that's hard to keep up, and in fact, his subsequent game, Earhart. He was such a perfectionist. I think he poured all of his royalties into developing, because the last I had contact with him, he's doing customer service for a phone company in Philadelphia. And he's a brilliant guy, but the Loadrunner programmer committed suicide. It's, that kind of success is like, what do you do next? They were I mean, it was certainly fun for us, but the pressure to repeat that, which led to some of these tensions I was talking to about in terms of strategy, was I felt you can't always count on that stuff coming in the door, and I was more arguing towards we need to have some proprietary products for the long term, things like Carmen Sandiego that you can leverage into TV shows and everything else.
Well, and I guess that plays into a bit of the question of you guys have the publishing rights. Do you also have the rights to sequels and so forth when you're getting the publishing rights to these games? How much control do the original programmers and designers have over the software once you guys got it?
They had a fair amount. I don't remember all the details of the contracts, but we tried not to make music industry type contracts where they were slaves, or they. And maybe a good example of this might be Jordan Mechner in Prince of Persia. I'm sure. He continues to have total control over that, I think. And we're friends. So we never wanted somebody to be forced to continue with us. And I think that was one of the things that attracted some of the talent. We didn't require that they give us their firstborn. And we also, at least while I was there, we didn't keep returns reserved from their royalties either. If returns came from the market, we ate them. We didn't go back to the programmer, or we didn't withhold a portion of their royalties. So,
wow, okay. That after having spoken to several people in the industry and the types of agreements that they had, that is a major, or let me put it this way, that was not a common practice in the industry.
It was a gamble, but it was all part of trying to attract. We were a family company, and for a lot of programmers, that was the attraction. And that's why we're still friends with all our former programmers. Nobody, and I say our, I mean, a lot of these people never worked for us. They just, independent.
Yeah.
It was just, I don't know whether. I think in the beginning, we were just used to the market expanding so fast, we never even thought about a returns reserve. And then when Electronic Arts got in, and they had and people would say, a programmer would come in and say, how come, my cousin John's video, game is 6 deep, at Computerland, and they've only got, one copy of mine or whatever. And I'd say, because 5 of those 6 products get returned to Electronic Arts, your cousin John's not going to get a royalty on them. It's, whereas anything you see out there, you've been paid for. And it was we got into that position by accident, but then we ended up, at least during the time I was there, and you understand that I left in '89, so anything you want to know, I know nothing about what happened afterwards.
Still 89 is a long trek before you get to 89. So there's a bit of a home computer crash in the U.S. around 85, where people talk about the market collapsing a little bit, sales of machines going down. Do you recall a perception of software being affected during that period?
Trying to remember when I left and when I came back. It was right in there somewhere. So the short answer is no. I don't remember anything about that.
No problem. And so you do leave for a little while. How long are you gone from the company?
I've always told myself it was a year and a half. But if someone came back and said, "Well, no, it was 9 months," or whatever, they might be right. I just really don't know.
I know that feeling well. Now, a lot of the very successful titles, again, Lode Runner, Choplifter, and so forth, they do get ported to a bunch of systems. You get the Japanese MSX, NES, and all this stuff. What was that process, the licensing process, like? Was it Broderbund's policy to actively try to license the software out? Was it something that was being organized by Broderbund Japan, which I guess is also a structure we need to talk about? Or was it the companies coming to you looking for the licenses?
I think they came to us.
Mm-hmm.
Meetings I can remember, they contacted us and said we'd like this or that or whatever. I won't be able to tell you a whole lot about Broderbund Japan. They didn't report to me. I mean, I know Henry Yamamoto and so on, but just don't remember.
No, perfectly legit. I was curious about the fact that there was a Broderbund Japan, and then when you said about the that relationship with StarCraft early on, I was wondering if it was an evolution of that or if it was just something that started on its own.
It was on its own. And I think it was run by Henry Yamamoto, a Japanese-American. Well, I guess at this point would have been in Japan a lot longer than Los Angeles, since he's still there. After that banner year of where we were bigger than IBM, I think, well, let's open an office there. And it could be that then he actively looked for ports to Japanese machines and tended those relationships. I just really don't know.
No problem. Now, the Apple II was a system that Broderbund supported, I want to say, a lot more than a lot of the other companies, or for a lot longer. Famously, the lead platform for Prince of Persia was the Apple II, at a time when most people would have said the Apple II, gets a throwaway port after we maybe built it on the Commodore 64 or done a PC version. Was that purely the decision of the programmer and designer, what platform they wanted to work on, or was there a financial or business motivation for that?
No, I think Jordan Mechner just had an Apple II. I mean, he started. He sent us a product which was just a little simulation of a karate guy. I think in 1982, when my mother was working with us, and she wrote back to him and real motherly and encouraged him in his efforts and so on. I think it's just that Jordan was on the Apple II, and so.
Gotcha. And just from the, and again, I'm looking through the list of old games that that the company brought out, and it really is all over the place as far as the different platforms and so forth. How big of an issue was that from a business standpoint to be supporting so many different platforms back in the 80s?
Not much. I mean, the computer stores would carry, different platforms. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it wasn't really an issue. Mm-hmm. I think the TRS-80 was gone pretty quickly in terms of being.
Yeah.
Just Apple and then, Commodore.
And did you have any interactions with the hardware makers back then, or was it basically no real interaction there?
No, quite a bit. Although I famously said, I don't know if it was famous or not, but it ended up in the press. I was giving a talk down in San Francisco on the software and what platforms to support, and I said, you can build a business plan on the Commodore 64 if you want to, but I might suggest the cocaine trade instead, because the risks and rewards are about the same, but I hear the people are a lot nicer. And this got back to Jack Tramiel and what was his sidekick's name? I forget.
Irving Gould?
No, it was European. Anyway, they got a good laugh out of it. They were tough cookies.
Yeah.
We had a friend that came over from that company and to work for us, and he said, "Oh, they enjoyed that one."
I'll believe it. I'll believe it. So, going back now to your idea of having to build up internal IP. You gave the example of Carmen Sandiego. Now, what was there a change to the internal structure in order to facilitate the creation of internal IP?
I think there certainly was after I left, when they got into doing living books and a lot of other things like that. And then they had somebody running the department who actually knew something about computers as opposed to a basketball coach. I mean, I think the big thing that they brought in after I got out of the product development was building tools, because when I was doing it was just kind of throw a bunch of things at the wall, put a bunch of guys in the back room, go check on the ones who haven't done anything, you fire them. The ones who have done something, you reward them handsomely. And tools, schmools, make it yourself,
That seems like a very expensive way to develop software over time.
Well, it worked. It worked initially. I mean, things like Print Shop, for example. Now, that was developed by Marty Kahn and David Balsam. Marty Kahn was an employee, but I had a rule that what you develop on your own time is yours. So, and I hired him based on a coloring book I'd seen in Manhattan when I was walked into this store and saw this computer-generated coloring book. And Marty Kahn, it turned out he was from the Bay Area and came over and, sure, I'll make video games. And then on the side, he did this thing with his friend David and Print Shop. And it was like, whatever I paid Marty, I mean, it paid off. I agree. It's an expensive way to continue, I suppose. But in terms of getting started, I mean, it generated, Print Shop. Carmen Sandiego was just some internal people, some external people. Trying to remember what else. I don't know. I mean, made a ton of money in those days. So.
Yeah, especially Carmen Sandiego was one of those titles that just becomes a phenomenon, where everybody knew the name of the game. The sequels seemed to be coming at a very fast pace. There was a big interest from schools. How does Broderbund deal with that from a marketing standpoint? Was that part of the marketing design from the get-go, that those were going to be the markets you were going to target, or did that just evolve organically as people discovered the product?
Well, I would have said the latter, except for I read just in the last year someone somewhere saying that we had cheated my sister out of credit for Carmen Sandiego because she ran marketing at the time and developed this educational market for it. And, I never really thought about that. I just, she died in 1995, so I can't exactly discuss it with her, but she, the product, I mean, it was 18 months, as a video game, the first 18 months it's a failure. A few copies have gone out, but that's it. And then suddenly it goes bananas through these channels that you're talking about. And It wasn't, the game was my idea, and it was developed with a group of, it was one of those things you wish could always happen. I have an idea. Let's see if it can become a big hit without my doing any work. It's like this success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. There were 12 people who worked on that game, and all 12 deserve credit, for it. But I hadn't really thought about your question until I saw this posted somewhere that somehow we cut my sister out of credit for the success of the game, and I hadn't really thought of that, But I always just said, kids were playing it for fun, and then teachers saw it and said, well, this is great. But, it's more probable that Cathy was actively working to develop educational markets, and that's how it got in there. But I could find out. The woman who was the model for Carmen Sandiego on the package worked with she was an assistant to my sister, and she still lives here in Marin, and I see her occasionally. I could ask her, I said, did you guys do that on purpose, or was that just kind of? I don't know.
It would be fascinating because I became aware of the product only after a couple of sequels had come out, or at least one. I think it was Europe had already come out at that point. Was the first one that I played, and I remember it was at a friend's house. His dad had bought it because he wanted his son to learn some geography. It literally had purchased it as an educational tool. And then I went back and tried to find the other ones, and I was hooked on it I was a geeky kid, so it was right up my alley. And the explosion in marketing for the product, TV shows and other ancillary product, this would have happened just after you left. Was there anything in the pipeline when you left for things like the TV show?
Yeah, that was the last thing I did, was negotiate the TV show. And the way that had worked is I had been at my 10th college reunion, and a woman in my dorm that I'd known in college gave me her card, and she was head of children's programming for NBC. So we got to thinking about when the game took off. I said, well, let's how about a TV show? So I called her, and she says, well, now I've moved over to movies, so I don't do children's programming. But you should talk to Kate Taylor at PBS and WGBH in Boston. So our strategy was, and this is why the relationship worked so well, we figured a TV show would sell the software. We didn't need any money from a TV show. So we showed up in WGBH, and they said, got to understand, we've been burned by Sesame Street. We made the Muppets what they were, and we got nothing for it. We had none of the rights to anything. And we said, well, okay, we don't want anything from your TV show. But, we own all the rights in our market, software rights. You can do whatever you want for the TV show. And then any music you create, you own it.
Wow.
And so on. So they were happy because then they could sell backpacks or whatever related to the TV show. And I gather they got into a dispute about the music with a cappella, because the music was, I don't know if you remember, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? But that had nothing to do with us. And our sales went through the roof because of the TV show. So that was my last official act before I left the industry, was that contract. I felt pretty good about it.
It was a massive success. I mean, I was already a bit too old for the show by the time it aired, but I do remember the idea that there was going to be a show based on a computer game I mean, there had been some cartoons based on arcade games and the like before, but computer games always seemed to be more of a niche product, and that really did seem huge at the time. Stepping back just a little bit before that, and we do have to talk about your exit from the company, but what, going into those final year or two of you being at the company, what is the day-to-day activity of the management team at Broderbund at that point? What were your duties going into the end of it?
Well, I remember one of them was that I started an affiliated labels program, which is for people who could produce their own software but didn't want to get into the stress of trying to sell it. We would sell it in return for, and I have no recollection whatsoever of what the financial arrangements were, but you know, they would do the packaging, and they would take the. Well, I remember the big issue with inventory risk, but now I don't recall who took it. But anyway, we developed relationships which were understood would be short term. So, for example, Origin Systems, Macromind. Trying to remember, did we do SimCity under an affiliate label at that point?
According to Dan Daglow, you guys were the publishers for the first game.
Well, we were initially.
Yeah.
They came out on C64, but then when Will wanted to do it on the Mac, I'm not quite sure. It could be that we only had rights to the C64, and you know, on the C64 it didn't look that impressive.
That's true.
When the Mac came out, he chose to work independently on that. My contribution to that, by the way, is the disasters. That was my idea. I said, Will, people like to destroy things. You can build a big city. And so he put in the disasters. And so,
oh, cool.
Anyway, yeah. So I was running affiliated labels when I started that. But I don't remember if that was full-time or not, or if I was doing something else along with that. Might have been it. I don't know. I can't remember.
And at around that time, what does the retail landscape for computer software look like? I mean, how?
Well, it's still pretty good. You know, things are going over to CDs a lot. At the same time, people are beginning to introduce machines, you know, kiosks to download software and stuff like that. I mean, it was certainly in our minds that this model of selling a concrete product provided by a publisher isn't going to last forever. That eventually it's going to go from the creator to the consumer without anybody in between. But I don't know if we figured that was going to be in 3 years or 30 years. I mean, I guess that's where we are now. Although there still are there still people who publish other people's work? Or?
Well, you could argue that, there is. There's still publishers publishing other people's work, and they're providing that editorial, that packaging, that additional graphical work. The example that just pops into my mind is a company called Cytronic that actually is still publishing physical games for the Commodore 64.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, you can actually buy games on cartridge, disc, sometimes even cassette for the brand new games for the Commodore 64 through these guys. And they also do digital. So you can download a digital Commodore 64 file that you run through an emulator or download onto a SD card for a real C64. And some of the stuff is impressive as hell. I mean,
just sell my Rambler parts business and go into the Commodore 64.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that they're not setting the world on fire with their financials, but but it really is cool. I mean, they're still making games where you're just like, wait, a C64 is doing that? And they're just very, very impressive titles from a technical standpoint.
That's because my brother still has kind of a library still with old Apples and stuff, Apple IIs to run things at his. He's got a place in Colorado, and whenever I stay there, I'll load up. Oh, I remember this had a great graphics, and I look at it and say, "Huh? That's what we thought was great graphics." And of course, I've been out of the business since '89, so I haven't seen things evolve slowly. I don't know. Anyway, it's amazing that they.
It is true. Now, I guess there's a couple quick questions. You didn't start. It wasn't your impetus to get into the game or into the computer business. Did you develop an affinity for the product or for the technical side of it as you were helping run the company, or was it always just sort of an arm's length transaction?
Well, no, it was, win some, lose some on the affinity for the product. After all, I was offered the worldwide rights to Tetris for $50,000 and turned them down.
Don told me about that. And
it actually ties into the technical part. I mean, part of the reason I was getting a lot of heat for not being more technically proficient. And so when we had that product come in, Tetris, and I showed it to people, and one of the programmers who'd been more critical of my ignorance said, "Well, I can program that in a weekend." And I thought, well, I don't want to look like an idiot just, publishing something that you can program in a weekend. I can't play Tetris. I'm diagonally dyslexic. I can't tell the difference between something going that way or that way. I just can't play Tetris. And, so I turned it down, and the rest is, anyway. So at the same time, Lode Runner had come in with these really squirrely graphics, and the first 25 levels were boring, but I found the 26th level and said, "Wow, this is going to be great. Let's just, so." Even a good hitter in baseball only hits 300, right?
Mm. That's true. That's true. You would say that you at least learned to enjoy the product to a certain extent.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not a deep gamer. I can't play adventure games. Arcade games are about my speed, but I reconnected with the programmer for Carmen Sandiego when I moved back to California a few years ago. I played on his hockey team for a while until I broke my collarbone a couple of years ago. And I was asking him, I said, "Well, did that bother you that I wasn't more technical?" And he said, "No, because you supported us. You admired what we did. You didn't compete with us." And he said, and that being a cheerleader that's what we needed. It was a competitive, high-stress business, and you would tell us how talented we were, and stick in there. And so I guess that was my chief cheerleader was my job.
And looking at the product, you did a very good job. So I guess at this point, I do have to ask very briefly a little bit about the history and the impact of Print Shop before we get to your exit from the company. Now, Print Shop, obviously, it's productivity software, but at the time, a very unorthodox one. What was the feeling inside the company? You had done some productivity software earlier. You said even a word processor, but what were there any concerns about how to place the product or whether or not it would fit in with the rest of your catalog?
No to the second question. How to place the product was a discussion with the programmers and designers, and the options that they offered us were originally it printed on the screen only, and then the notion of having it print out was brought up. I think they brought it up. I don't want to take credit for it. With kind of this look on their faces, because at the time there was no standardization in printers. You had to have a driver for every printer, and you had to test every combination of computer and printer. And they were daunted at doing that. But in terms of product line, we felt we didn't see a problem with that, and I think. Even just some of the demos we did when we early on with magazines and some of the hardware manufacturers, and they'd look at it and say, "Wow, this will be great. This will be great." So I don't think we had any. Once they said that they could do a printing version, we never looked back. I mean, because we all had printers, right? It was great fun.
Mm-hmm. True. Yeah, and as somebody who probably some of my very first computer graphic work was in print shop, just making those very blocky images that were possible on it. And then, of course, spending hours and hours waiting for your printer to print out a banner was a tremendous amount of fun. Okay, so why do you end up leaving Broderbund?
Well, there are two things. One of the things that had quite an impact, I mean, it was a lot of stress. When we started, my brother would write a game, or even Carmen Sandiego was, maybe we put $50,000 into it outside of expenses we would have had anyway. Mm-hmm. And we were getting into a world where products were costing millions, and your career was made or lost on whether or not, like we backed a, was it for Nintendo? I'm trying to remember what it was. Something, it must have been Nintendo. It read the motions of your hands to play this game, which and
the U-Force. The U-Force.
Yeah, we went to CES and got $85 million worth of orders, and then we had $6.5 million into it, and we couldn't get the failure rate to get below 10%. So,
well,
yeah. Well, that's a lot.
That does bring up a question of, obviously, Broderbund had never done any hardware peripherals before this.
Right. And the thing is, that just happened to come through Ed Bernstein, I think Dave Kaplan, maybe someone, I'm trying to remember. Whoever had invented it knew the fellow who was at that point running product development at Bernstein, or maybe, I think he was anyway. And it was just like, here. I mean, everything was evolving back then, Or they were working, when I left, they were working on Myst with those brothers up in Spokane. What is the name? Or I don't remember. I just remember it was getting to be like Hollywood.
Yeah.
You bet the farm on every product. And I was 39, and four guys my age in the industry who were either 39 or 40, and were founders of their companies, dropped dead or had strokes that year.
Oh.
And I just, like the guy who was running Simon and Schuster, their computer thing. I just can't remember their names. But I knew them all, and I just thought, this stress is going to kill me. And my sister had quit that year, 89, and we come from a close family. My parents are still alive at 98, and
wow.
other than my sister who died, the other four of us, every Saturday we all do a Zoom call with my folks, and we were eating each other alive, and it had been almost 10 years of that, And so I just walked into my brother Doug's office and said, I just want to go back to being a family. I'm just tired of this, because he and I just disagreed so much on the direction of the company, and I said, I just don't want to deal with it, And even, that part of the reason when I left, we then moved to Colorado. We moved to New Zealand and then Colorado, is I didn't want people from the company coming to me with problems or disagreements. The stress was just too much.
Were these just little things, or was this some major philosophical difference about what Broderbund should be?
Well, the latter. I was very much, we need to be proprietary, so that if you own, we're in the world's Carmen Sandiego, you can make the movie, you can make the plush doll, you can whatever it is. You don't have to be out there fishing for the next Choplifter. But
and Doug was not about that.
He was, keep it moving, get more products. Don't sit and spend too much energy on one.
Yeah, no, that would be. I can understand the impetus to not wait until a product fails or a series stops being interesting and then having to scramble. But at the same time, when you do have a perennial hit like a Carmen Sandiego, you're foolish to leave the money on the table.
Well, I think here we are 35 years after it was released, and there's new versions on the internet. I don't know how many times people have contacted me in the last 20 years. Well, who owns the movie rights? Well, hell if I know. I don't.
Well, there's a new Netflix series, so that's an animated series. So I'm guessing somebody's got to own the rights to that.
That's when it
yeah. And I guess then, so getting back to the U-Force just briefly, so this product is brought to you guys and you're thinking, okay, we're going to give this a go, and you can't get the failure rates or at least the accuracy rate of the device under control. Was that a purely manufacturing issue, or was it inherent in the technology?
I couldn't tell you. We assumed it was a manufacturing issue at the time. The retailers weren't going to carry a toy that failed 10% of the time. That's not going to work.
So, were you still at the company when the thing launched?
I remember being at CES when all those orders came in, and I remember the frustrations of Ed Bernstein trying to get the failure rates down. But that might have been right about the time I left.
It's become a bit of a joke amongst the retro gaming community that the U-Force is the controller that you can't control anything with. But I've never actually used one myself. So,
well, did they ever release something like that?
Oh no, the U-Force came out. It's considered one of the big flops, but it came out. It hit the store shelves. There's a ton of them circulating still in the collector community.
But who released it?
Broderbund. It has Broderbund licensing on it.
All right. Well,
yeah.
See, I said I lost contact with what happened after '89.
Well, and yeah. An interesting idea, interesting concept, hit the market, but yeah, it didn't go anywhere. So you decide to leave because you're done with it. Do you sell off your shares at this point? Are you still all invested in the company then?
I hung on until it went public.
Okay. Oh, it hadn't gone public yet by 1990. Okay. When does the company go public?
My guess is 92, 93, somewhere in there.
Gotcha. Okay. And did you have any contact or any attempt to get back into the industry after that?
No, at some point in the 90s, people would call me asking me, they kind of wanted to see if I'd get back in, or I got offered the job to run the North American Video Game Association. And I called the head of the European Video Game Association. He said, "Don't do it. They're just trying to use you because you have this Disney reputation, with Carmen Sandiego. You're going to have to stand up and defend violent video games in front of the Senate." And I said, I don't want to do that. That sounds terrible. I couldn't stand the stress. But other than that, no, I haven't had any contact. People sometimes send me stuff and ask for comment, and it's like, I don't know. I mean, I don't get much beyond playing Words with Friends. That's all I know.
Do you recall by any chance who approached you about that representative role for the North American Video Game Association?
I do not remember.
And so what have you been up to for the last 30 years?
Well, we bought a ranch in Colorado that was going to be developed into all these houses and golf courses, and we restored all the wetlands and stuff to make it a ranch. Did that for 10 years. We adopted 4 kids from troubled and abused backgrounds. And really, there hasn't been any room for anything besides that. They're all out of the house. We established a vineyard in New Zealand, which we then had a partner embezzle from us. So we just sold that in April.
Wow.
I'm sure I missed something, but it was basically. So anyway, then we moved back to, we were living in New Zealand on the vineyard, and when my brother Doug's wife died, we moved. What's that? She was dying. That's right. She died shortly after we got back. But we came back here to California. We figured it was safe now. I ran into a few old Broderbunders on the street, and we'd get together and play guitar and stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
At least until the pandemic.
Yeah, it's put a damper on plenty of people's plans.
Right.
Yeah, so basically there was life after the video game industry.
Yes, but it was a special time. I mean, and maybe some of it's just because we were young, but I've got a couple friends now who work for Atlassian. Are you familiar with Atlassian? It's a couple $1 billion outfit out of Australia, and they say, it's like Broderbund on steroids, friendly, fair, trying to do the right thing. It was a special time, and obviously just the growth of the computer business was fun. And one of the things I've realized from staying in contact with a lot of the people is just how many incredibly talented people there were. I mean, it was easy to be a cheerleader for those folks. They were really exceptional, still are. They've gone on to do all kinds of things, from being, writing big Hollywood blockbuster movies to being Google fellows and stuff like that.
Yeah, it really was a magnet for a certain type of creativity and ingenuity that persists throughout the industry to this day. Mm-hmm. Like I said, on top, it was a company name you couldn't get, you couldn't avoid, and you didn't want to back in the day. As a kid, Broderbund was a name that you just knew. It was one of those names that showed up on your games, and yeah. I guess close out, there's a question I ask all of my interview subjects, and it's a two-parter. First part is, what was a trend or a move in the industry that you didn't see coming, that caught you by surprise? And what was a trend that you thought was going to go someplace that just fizzled out?
Huh. Thought about those. I'm sorry, just a second.
You left out all your community service work you've done since you left Broderbund.
Oh, okay.
Things like coaching. I'm trying to get rid of that sound that keeps coming up.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
Anyway, I just want to tell you.
My wife says I've left out all the community service stuff that I've done in the last 30
I
years.
can cut it. I can pop that back in. Not a problem.
It's okay. I've got some things on the stove I need to get to pretty soon.
Oh, sorry.
That probably boiled away. Yeah, I came back and coached more girls basketball and stuff like that, but not national championship level. Trends that I missed. Well, I don't know. I guess it was too soon to have even thought about the whole phone thing. Because phones were still the size of footballs, when I left. Trends that I thought would happen that didn't. I don't know. I mean, the trend that I did see coming was the internet. From seeing Minitel in France, I said, that's what computers are for. Didn't see the dark side of it, of course, because. But I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer to those questions.
No problem.
I don't remember enough about what I was thinking back then. So.
That is perfectly all right. Any final words for any old Broderbund fans that might be listening?
Well, I'm glad you were fans. If it happened after 1990, don't blame me. And I don't know what to say. I mean, it's at the time when we were, immersed in the stress of doing it, we said someday we'll look back on these as the good old days. That's the trend that we did see coming. Even if I run into people, where there was tension back then, it's now like, oh yeah, I remember. I don't know if Don Daglow was still mad at me. I fired him, but
no, not at all. He actually spoke extremely glowingly of both you and your brother.
That's very nice. And I think at this point, we would all say that about each other. That we were all under stress. It was fun for a while. We did our best. We hit the jackpot, and we made mistakes, and that's human,
Gotcha.
I'm glad I was there.
And we're glad you were there, too.
Thank you.
Okay, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll let you get back to the kitchen.
Well, you've made me dredge my memory more than I've tried to in a long while. Maybe that'll ward off dementia a little while longer. So.
If then my good deed for the day has been done.
Well, I read yesterday, that being bilingual wards off dementia, and I presume you're bilingual, right?
Trilingual. Yeah, I grew up in Argentina, actually.
Yeah, right. So you're like, what's his name, Viggo Mortensen, with the Spanish and the Danish and the English.
Yeah.
That'll keep your brain going. You see, I'm latently bilingual, so I have to. It's Swedish and English. So I gotta get the brain working. Well, you got my memory going. So. Well,
and the easy way to do that, you turn on some of the Swedish language programs on Netflix, and that'll help get it working.
The last time I did that, it depressed me. I realized I needed the subtitles, and I wouldn't have needed it before. All right,
that's only for the first 2 hours. Okay.
Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I hope you've enjoyed another Video Game Newsroom Time Machine interview. You can leave us comments on Twitter, Instagram, and if you like what we're doing here, drop us a couple of bucks on Patreon. All the links are in the description below.